Hi, I'm Mary Lyons, the Wealth Woman.
I'm Eric Alexander with Benchmark Income Group.
Welcome to the Big Wealth Podcast. We're excited to have you with us today. We have what I think is a particularly interesting topic today. Amy Cuddy just came out with an article in the Washington Post about Pandemic Flux Syndrome, which is the idea that when life is out of control, in this case, because of the pandemic for a prolonged period of time, that people who are experiencing either depression or anxiety are making decisions that dramatically affect their life or throw it into flux. And so we wanted to,
sometimes for better or worse, right?
Yeah, maybe intentionally, maybe not in some cases. And so what we wanted to talk about today is what's going on with that, and particularly how is that affecting people's finances? So
Right.
Eric, as you've been talking to people, what have you been seeing?
Yeah, I think it's crazy. I mean, I think the COVID and pandemic and whatever you want to call it at that point was a giant, and I think for better or worse, a giant reset button. Like everybody has the ability to kind of step back and go, okay, was this, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And is that working for me? Is the place where I live, do I like that? Is the person I'm married to, do I like that? Is the job I'm working at good for me? Are we spending money and saving money in the right ways? And I think it's been just, are we doing the activities that fulfill us or that we're, good for?
Well, and I think what you're saying assumes a degree of deliberateness, which is definitely some of the people that I am talking to have approached those conversations with. But I also think there is an entire segment of the population that just feels I don't know how to, a sense of wrongness in their life or unhappiness, and that wants to make a change because there is a hope that if I make this change, I'm going to feel different. So I'm actually going to read a quote real quick from the article. This was one of the people that was quoted. Let's see. It was, I think, Needy Tawari, and I hope I'm saying that right, who is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in trauma and anxiety. And what she said was, many people feel some emptiness, which brings discomfort, and discomfort can make us feel out of control. We then try to regain control by changing what we can, including our jobs, relationships, or appearances, somehow redefining our self-concept. So then Amy Cuddy goes on to say that people who tend toward anxiety might be experiencing strong urges to make major life changes. Meanwhile, people who tend toward depression are feeling compelled to withdraw and shut down. And both of those reactions are grounded in the desire to escape. And so I think this is so interesting. And even like just this weekend at my daughter's softball game, I had this conversation with a neighbor who had also read this article. And then we were talking about it in the context of people we knew and what they were going through, and showing empathy and trying to help people understand whether or not their decisions were deliberate and intentional, or maybe they just feel that way, but they're not. And so I find this fascinating. So I actually want to bring up a couple of scenarios from conversations that I've had with clients. So one client going through this pandemic, one of the spouses lost their job. And this client has been someone that has pretty consistently maxed out their spend. And when I first met them, they were in pretty substantial credit card debt, which we then worked and paid off. And then they had some medical issues, which threw them back into credit card debt, which they then worked through and paid off. And then got ahead a little bit, bought a house. The house had some major issues, which then threw them back into credit card debt. And then they managed to work their way out of it for a third time. And so during the pandemic, when one of the spouses lost their job, I think there was the fear that they would go that direction again. But because they weren't traveling and they weren't going out to eat and they didn't need to buy new clothes and that sort of thing, they found that they actually could live quite comfortably off of one spouse's income. And so for the past year or so, since the other spouse was gainfully employed again, they've been able to save the entirety of his salary.
Right.
And so here you see someone who I don't know, is that a pandemic flux syndrome response from the article? Or
Well,
would you say that's more, I mean, to me, that seems very deliberate and healthy.
that's very deliberate. Yeah. Well, but I think it's also a response to the environment
Mhm.
of losing a job, right? So it had in loose effect, maybe not directly COVID related or pandemic related, but somebody lost a job. And I think people see this all the time. Somebody loses a job and they're like, oh crap, what do we do? Let's tighten our budget a little bit. Let's work some things around. And then they wake up a month later, 2 months later, and like, man, it's not so bad. I don't
All
feel
those things
deprived.
yeah.
Yeah.
All those things you think you need, maybe you don't. And I'm wondering how much of this is really what's going on with the job market, because just about everybody you talk to says, oh, we're having such a hard time hiring and
Right.
everyone is quitting. And, I think for some people who maybe lost their job during the pandemic, they realize like, hey, we can live comfortably on one spouse, bringing home income, and then we can be home with the kids more. It makes it easier to travel when you want to. It's
Right.
a change of priorities. And I know, like in our household, there have been a lot of conversations over the past year and a half, both with my kids and with my spouse, about what do you want and why do you want it? And
Right.
that's really the filter that we're running these conversations through. But I think sometimes things happen very differently. For example, another client that I
Right.
spoke to recently, her spouse's job was in a state of flux, very unstable. Some of the things that were happening at the company. So a lot of fear of possibly losing the job.
Right.
And then you had the resurgence of Delta, kind of bringing everybody back into that state of panic. And despite the fact that they've been in a very healthy, very happy long-term relationship, he just came home and was like, I'm done. I need a reset button. I'm leaving. And so to me, you look at something like that, and that's maybe like it's a way to feel like you're in control, but
Right.
it's actually a very reactive response to the stimulus that's happening almost from an exterior standpoint.
Right.
So I think, and I'm not articulating this very well, but when it comes to finances, is it like a deliberate, internally driven, like choice?
Purposeful. Right.
Or is it a reaction to external stimulus that just you're almost responding in an attempt to gain some feeling of control?
Well, you feel like you're doing something, and something may not be positive, but it's just something. So you feel like you're pulling a lever. And I think that's always the advice that they give someone that's lost a spouse is like, look, you just lost a spouse. This is a major traumatic life event. For the next year, don't make any big decisions. Yeah, I mean, just sit status quo, get through this year, because you're going to want to go do stuff. I remember talking to my mom. Her mom died when her mom was 47, 48.
Mhm.
And her dad just went into, I want to get rid of everything in my life that reminds me of the wife that I just lost.
Mhm.
So they had a cabin in New Mexico. They sold the cabin. They sold all. He just got rid of. I mean, he didn't get rid of the girls. So thankfully that was a positive move. But he got rid of everything in his life that sort of reminded him of his wife that he just lost. And it's like, look, you should have just. And he regretted it afterwards, and she regretted it afterwards that he made the decision, and it was all emotionally driven. And I think that's
Right.
where we are a lot of times. And somebody told me last week, right? I read it, that anger is a mask for vulnerability. And so I think sometimes pain and fear, but I think it's either anger or action. And action could be a result of vulnerability too, that you just want to grab a hold of something, anything, and maneuver it just to show that you can.
Right. Well, there's that sense of if I do something, I'm going to feel different. And a lot of times that's false. I mean, I've had
Right.
conversations about people who are like, we're just going to pick up and move. And, and I've been able, at least in some cases, to have conversations about like, what's the most important thing in your life? Oh, it's your grandkids. Does this bring you closer to your grandkids or further away? Oh, further away. That's interesting. Do you think you're going to feel different when you're in that environment? Or do you think actually you're going to feel the same when the excitement of something new wears off? Oh, you're going to feel the same, right? I mean, it's very, but
Wherever
it's
you go, there you are.
there you are. We don't necessarily ask ourselves these questions, right? And so I've seen some very positive changes as well, where
Yeah.
people who have maybe been in a job they don't really love, just kind of in that status quo mode, waking up, going, living that life because it's comfortable, but maybe not happy, have been able to define what they want from their career and make the changes that have pushed them in that direction. And that I think is very positive and healthy.
Yeah.
But
Well,
again,
momentum, we talked about that last week.
Mhm.
Momentum and inertia carry a lot of weight.
Oh, in our day-to-day lives, yes, there's
Yeah.
something to be said for routine, right? Even if it's not happiness, it's comfort. So, Eric, I think actually it would be kind of neat to get a little bit personal, and you can push this back on me too.
Sure.
Um, what areas do you feel like over the past year you've been able to say, hey, I want to be deliberate, or maybe you have thought about your life in different terms than you normally would, that you see as being intentional? And I'm totally
Yeah.
putting you on the spot, right? I mean, we have these little conversations about what we're going to cover, and then I totally derail it.
Yeah. No, the left turns are fun. Well, because it makes me think of it, right? Well, I think there's a couple of things that we've done that have been very, very, very deliberate. One has been, we just bought some land up in Oklahoma, and we're working to go put a house out there, and use that as some rental income. And that was a very, very deliberate thing. And I say deliberate because you and I have been talking about that for months and months and months and months.
Right.
And it's sort of like filtering into my brain, like osmosis, as you just walk by, I'm like feeding off your brain. But it's this,
weirdly
but
creepy.
I think, yeah, it's totally creepy. But I think that was one of those things that were very deliberate. And the what and the why is I want to start diversifying my income, because I'm looking around going, hey, I live in a world where the stock market drives a fairly significant portion of my income, and the stock market does this and this up and down every day and every week. Maybe it would be nice to have some component of my income that's not completely based on what's going on in the financial market.
Well, it's the same idea of diversification in your portfolio. You're just extending it into diversification of income streams, which I think
absolutely.
is great and philosophically consistent with what we teach people. I think there's been a couple areas for me too that have changed, in part because we've done things differently. So we took a road trip. It was supposed to be 3 weeks. It was only 2, in an RV last summer. And what's really fascinating is I did not like road trips growing up, because as a kid, when we grew up, it's not like you could watch your iPad while you were driving. It was like you had a Mad Libs and maybe some logic puzzles and
the car game.
Yeah, exactly. The little magnetic ones, I remember those. But they were brutal, and we would like go almost nonstop. Like it would only stop when you like emergency had to go to the bathroom, or it was time
to eat. It was the Bataan Death March. It was like we will conquer this road trip, right?
Right. And so Mike would always say, let's take a road trip. And we've been married for 15 years now. So this would have been 14 years into our marriage. And I would always say, no, let's fly somewhere. And so we had never taken a road trip as a family ever, or as a couple. And because of the pandemic, we did it. And what I realized is I love road trips, especially the way he does it, because he's totally ADD. And so we'll be driving and he'll be like, that was cool. We're pulling over. We're going to go check it out. And so it's almost like this extended quality time, because the kids are doing their thing in the back seat, watching the iPad or playing on Nintendo. And then he and I really get to connect. And so what that really sparked with us was a desire to have a house in the mountains, which if you had told me, hey, you're going to love hiking in the mountains, not my jam. Because again, you want to talk forced death marches. That's what hiking was like when I was a kid. And so it couldn't
we
stop
will summit this.
Around. Yes, we will do it on limited supplies. It was like you had to see how far you could push yourself. And so it really has helped us understand what we do and don't like. And so part of the whole reason I'm doing the Broken Bow stuff is because I want the house in New Mexico, whether that's a Taos house or in Santa Fe or wherever it is, or maybe we'll end up in Colorado. I have no idea at this point, but it's the idea that
we're taking bets at the office.
Are you? Are you?
No.
Yeah,
but we should.
I mean, I think
I'm going to make a bingo deal of it.
But I think all of that is very deliberate, right? And instead of being impulsive, because initially I was like, I want a house in Taos. This one's for sale. It meets my parameters. I'm going to buy it.
Let's go. Right.
It's been a year at this point. And it will probably be another year before we make a purchase because I'm lining everything up the way it is. And I think that's one of the ways you know that you're making an intentional choice is that you still want to make that choice a year later. And that's a
Yep.
long time, or 2 years later, that's a long time. But I can tell you, I mean, even just my normal personality would have been to just like buy the property. And
And then deal with the
instead,
consequences and the
yeah,
stress
it'd be
on the
fine.
other end of it.
I'd get enough enjoyment, like it would be worth it. But I think
Right.
that's the other thing is that what do you want and why do you want it conversation, which I'm going to give credit to Kevin Keppel for asking me those
Yep.
questions. Because while I ask other people that all the time, asking myself somehow, like it didn't occur to me that I could or should. And so when I look at the underlying driver for all of the decisions that I make, it's about finding peace, right?
Yep.
Why do I want something? For peace. And so, you know, I think really asking yourself those questions, not just what do I want, but why,
Right.
is one way that you can figure out, okay, I'm making this decision because it really is a good decision and it brings me closer to my like life goals.
Right. Well, and then I think that idea of being able, and you talked about deliberative versus just reactionary. And I think I think it's so hard to not have the reactive run away with your brain, like, and just short circuit everything. And just like, nope, we're doing this, you know, damn the consequences. This is what's going to happen.
It's
but I
your
think
elephant in the rider.
It is totally the elephant in the rider, right? And for those of you that don't know the elephant in the rider, it's not the Bobby Boucher medulla oblongata, but it's the like the inner part of your brain, the reptilian part of your brain is sort of has no capacity for words. It has no capacity for sort of forming words. It's just reactionary, and it is very myopic. It's only looking at what's in front of it, and it's always scared because that's the part of your brain that's there to keep you alive. When you see a snake,
also very powerful.
Yeah, well, when you see a snake on the side of the road, it's not time to break out a spreadsheet and a pro and con list on why we should move away. Your body just reacts, right? And so I think it's, to your point, I thought that was really brilliant, was trying to find some way to short circuit the elephant and say, look, let's fast forward in our brain, because we're the only people, we're the only thing in the universe or on the planet anyway, that has the ability to project ourselves out into the future. So let's think about this 5 minutes from now. Let's think about this 5 years from now. We're here, the grandkids are 200 miles away. The allure of wherever you were going to go in your story, right, has worn off. The new of the house is not new anymore. We're just in our routine, but now we don't have our kids and grandkids close by. Is that going to make you happy, or is that going to make you sad? Right.
Right.
If you're going to go get the house in Taos or Santa Fe, and now you've got the stress of I have to cover 2 mortgages. Is that going to bring more peace to my life or less peace?
Right.
Right. And I think that, but if you don't have the why behind it, what is it that I'm looking for? And I think that's where a lot of people are quitting jobs. It's like, I'm so sick of this job because
I just don't want this.
I just don't want this job. Right. It's like, okay, well, what about this job do you not like? And if you go to this other place, is it just going to be the same thing you had before? You know, I think it's part of having that more deliberative, just slow it down, because inevitably you're going to get to that new spot, and then you've created a problem that you've got to go now work through. You're in debt.
I think there's a fair amount of people, at least that I've talked to, that were pretty smart about what was happening with the unemployment checks, because there are quite a few people who quit their jobs, or who lost their jobs, who were able to collect unemployment, right? Because it was due to COVID, or maybe their employer told them to, because that would be more income for them than they were actually making. And so I've talked to a fair amount of people who were able to save substantially more. And so they're in a position where they have 6 months of income, or not income necessarily, but 6 months of expenses, or even a year of expenses saved up. And so they're quitting with the expectation that they will find something that is interesting to them over the next 6 months to a year. Right. And, you know, there's part of me that's like, hey, that's kind of cool because you can make those decisions. And then there's part of me that thinks that's really scary because everybody's going to be coming back to the workforce at roughly the same time.
Right.
You know,
right.
and then it's going to be a different kind of environment. And so I think
that, well, but what also a cool test for them, because if they figured out they can live on one income, When the second spouse is starting to go look for a job, maybe they don't need the high paying sales gig or whatever they were doing before. Maybe they go do something that gives them more freedom, more time with the kids, doing something that is more, they have a lot more
Important to them.
passionate about. Yeah, that's more important about it.
Yeah,
Because they're not worried about the money.
and we're so trained to see success as those dollars, right? Like, and as financial advisors, aren't we supposed to encourage people to go chase that? But I think there's,
Well, because I got to
again,
make a living too, Mary. They
I
need to make more
know.
money so I can make a living.
But money, again, is just a tool. And so if it's not bringing you closer to the things that really fulfill you, then it's taking you further away. And at that point, it's
Right.
not worth it. Right. And, the other thing that somebody said, and again, I think it was Kevin Keppel who said this to me. And as I was talking to my neighbor this weekend, it's something that kind of came up because she was talking about, normally she's a real high driver, she's an achiever, and she just, like, everything's going really well in her life, but she just has this undercurrent of discontent, which I think is a lot of us. And I think that
Right.
article that Amy Cuddy wrote, like, hits the nail on the head. But it made me remember, one of the things that Kevin said to me early on during COVID is, what do you have to look forward to? Are you putting things out there that you look forward to? Because when we get into this state of like anxiety or depression or stasis, then that liminal experience of sameness, right? If you don't throw something out there that you're looking forward to, it's easy to begin to feel like I'm going to continue feeling like this forever unless I do something different.
Right.
But if you can give yourself that kind of marker a week or 2 weeks out, that suddenly, like, there's this little pop of joy that will happen, I think that makes a huge difference.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And it can be something silly. I mean, like, I went to Target this weekend and bought my kids little $5 packs of Pokemon cards. It's not like that was expensive at all, but I did it because I was like, I need joy in my life, and watching their excitement because they have a surprise that they get to open is enough that it sparks joy for me. Right. And
Right.
so that I think that ability to focus on what am I giving as opposed to what am I getting is huge, even when you're making the financial decisions, right? Like the house and house, what am I actually giving? That is about the memories that we'll be able to create with our kids and, the trips and that connection with my spouse, but I want to do it in a responsible way. And I think that's where, when we feel unhappy, it's easy to turn almost inward. And what we should be doing is looking for ways to turn outward.
Yeah. And to build a foundation that sustains you when the next thing hits and the next thing hits. Because I think that's the other thing she talked about in the article, and we can close out with this, I think, but is we're losing that, I think, what they called surge capacity. Like we are tired, we sort of pour on the gas, we make it happen. And then we have nothing left over when the next crisis or the next thing happens. And so I think a lot of what we need to be focusing on financially and emotionally is sort of building that base so that you have that cushion, you have something to go back to when the next thing hits, so that you're not always having to sort of, there's no decision fatigue. You've got a bigger, deeper base to pull from.
Well, that's why diversified passive income streams is so important. I think you hit the nail on the head with that, right? Is that you have the ability to get through things and make decisions very differently if you aren't under that constant pressure to earn, because you've got assets that are earning for you. I think that's a perfect ending point. Good point here.
Yeah,
Brilliantly done.
Brilliantly done. Well done.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. You can find me at The Wealth Woman on Instagram or Facebook. Eric, where can I find you?
I'm Economics with Eric at Facebook and Instagram as well. Thank you guys. Have a great week.